Hello, everyone. So good to see you all. And I hope that in this talk, I can give you some knowledgeable goodies, some intensive training sessions, and maybe probably not blow your mind away, but let's see how it goes. But I have to say that my mind was blown away because when I was listening to Kenneth's talk about personal branding, I found that I looked at my LinkedIn profile and I was like, oh my God, my LinkedIn profile is an embarrassment. But let's see how it goes. Maybe after this talk, I'll try to brand myself better. Anyway, here today, I'll talk to you about scientific leadership. Hopefully, a thing or two can be retained in your mind. And let's see how it goes. Let's roll with it. There was a research done by Gallup in 2015, and what they found was that only 1 out of 10 managers can do their job effectively. Another 2 out of 10, they found that with sufficient training, then they can be averagely good. And what that means is that you and I could be one of those 7 who may not be as good as a manager or as a leader. And if we are not as good as a manager, as a leader, what that means is that we will work with other people, we will be impacting people, and be a negative influence in their lives. So what we want to do here is to try to see how we can learn to be a better leader, a better manager, and hopefully throughout this talk, you can learn something from it. Another research done by Gallup, this one is in 2013, and what they found was that just having an engaged workforce can increase the amount of revenue per share by as much as 147%. And just to be clear here, we are not talking about 14.7% increase in productivity. We are talking about 147%. We are talking about doubling your workforce and more without paying extra. Of course, you can pay extra salary for your workers, for example, and all you need to do is to have good leaders, good managers to run your teams. Many of us here are students, and some of us here are in the workforce, and I'm pretty sure you have run into people who could be a bit toxic. And it turns out that there has been a research around how toxic people can impact your company. And here's how the research goes. They went around, they surveyed 60,000 people from 11 different industries. And what they found was that the superstars, people who are great at their job, very pleasant to work with, they can increase the revenue of the company by around $5,000. And people who are toxic, they decrease the revenue. They cost the company as much as $12,000. What does that mean? It means that when you scale this into hundreds of thousands of people, eventually you run into a situation whereby a superstar, you need 2.4 times a superstar in order to just offset a toxic worker. So what do you do with toxic people? Well, you don't hire them. If you have toxic people in your company, if you run your company, maybe they don't deserve to be there. Maybe they're costing you. Because managing toxic people are hidden costs, things that you don't see, but people are managing it behind the scenes. So avoid them. There's another research here that was done, and this is about workforces, but it turns out that the same research was done on marriage and it yielded the same result. Here's the research. They found out that there's a magic number between positive relationships and negative relationships, positive interactions and negative interactions. It turns out that some of us are too nice. We want to be pleasant to everyone. It turns out that some of us are too toxic. We have high demands about everyone, right? But it turns out that there has to be a proper balance, and the proper balance is 5:1. And here's the idea. You want to be sufficiently honest with the other person, and as you can imagine, none of us are perfect. But the interesting thing here is that the amount of negative interaction has to be offset by positive interactions by 5:1. So it's okay to criticize people, but it's not okay to criticize too much because it will debilitate the amount of teamwork that you can do with your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers. So if you need to think about positive to negative interactions, this is the magic number. Next, let's talk about confidence. A lot of us, when we watch TV, go to YouTube, maybe go to TEDx talk like this, you will see that confidence, when someone is confident, maybe they are competent. But it turns out that's the other way around. When we look at confidence, it turns out that we are actually latching to a psychological phenomenon called the certainty effect. The certainty effect tells us that we are very likely to latch into feelings of certainty, not rational thinking, even if the odds say otherwise. That's the thing. It turns out that there's an inverse correlation between confidence and competence. Some of you might probably have seen this in the past. This is by a research by Dunning and Kruger. And what they found is that the least competent you are, the more overconfident you become. And that's a problem because, as you can see, the more confident you are, the more competent you are, the more you realize that the sea is too broad, too deep, too wide, too shallow, to swallow. And what that means then is that for you and I, we have to be very careful on assessing people in terms of the confidence level that they have. Here's another research. It piggybacks on Dunning and Kruger, but this is a bit more interesting. As you can see in this research, it was found that the more competent a person is, the less confident they are, the more underconfident they are. And the other way around, of course. But what's interesting thing about this research is that they paired them together. So here's how they did it. Someone who's extremely competent, not very confident, they paired them up with someone who's very, very confident and not competent. And they had different pairs, different combinations of pairs, and they tried to find out when they work in teams, what's the effect? Here's the effect. It turns out that the wider the gap between the confidence of the most competent person and the least competent person, the less synergy they had, which then means that the unjustified role of confidence in teamwork can actually backfire. So be very, very careful of confidence because confidence is not competence. It's usually the inverse. So be very mindful of this. Here's another study. So 2 men went for a job interview, but you only have slot to hire one. Who will you hire? This guy right here? Chris Hemsworth? Or this guy right here? You probably don't need to answer me, right? But at the back of your head, maybe it's the guy on the left. Why is that? Well, it turns out that it's a Hallow Effect. It turns out that for all of us, we have this psychological phenomenon, psychological bias, whereby people who look better, people who are well-groomed, tends to be more successful in our thinking, more smart in our thinking, more generous in our thinking, more valuable, more important, so on and so forth. It turns out that a lot of research has been done here. In fact, what they found is that for people who are physically unattractive, when they evaluated their mental health conditions, they find that they are more maladjusted. People who are physically attractive, what they found is that they are less guilty, even if it's for the same crime. For people who are unattractive, what they found is that they are a bit more dangerous. Interestingly, they did the research here in AI, actually. They tried to converge various phases of criminals, and look what it turns out. I don't have a picture here, but it turns out that it's just an average person, someone that looks like you and I, someone who's you can consider handsome, beautiful, but that's how we judge people. Physically attractive people, well, they have lighter sentences. And of course, even during interviews, there was a research that was done here, whereby they asked the interviewers, did you have a bias towards the more handsome guy? And the interviewer says, no. But it turns out that the research, they actually favored the one who looks better. So how do we combat Hallow Effect? The unfortunate thing is that there's no way to combat the Hallow Effect, because even if you call it out yourself, even you know that you're biased in favor of the Hallow Effect, people around you are not. So the only way to get past this is obviously to look better. Mental fatigue. A lot of you are still very young. I am very sad because I'm not as young as you. And you probably are not running into this as much as I am. But one day you might run into this. And here's the nature of mental fatigue. There was a research that was done around this. And what they found is that at different times of the day, the quality of decision changes. And the research is done on criminals who are looking for parole. And they evaluated the judge, how the judge will actually make their decisions. It turns out that the judge will make favorable decisions during the time when they are rested. What are these times? Well, at the start of the day, after the lunch break, and after a tea break. So that's those three spikes that you see there, those are those timings. So if you are going up to your boss and want to request something, those are the times that you have to request things because they will judge more favorably towards you. The more tired they are, the more they want to maintain the status quo. There was another research, and this time it's about sleep. In this research, what they did was they asked a bunch of military officers to do a task. So it's a 20-day task. And how they did it was they segregated the military officers into 4 categories. One category will sleep for 4 hours and perform the task for the rest of their waking day, and of course, having lunch, dinner, so on and so forth. And the only difference is that the amount of sleep that they spent, 4 hours, 5, 6, and 7. It turns out that at the beginning, those who spent 4 hours of sleep were actually much more productive. But as they reached the second and third day, they performed worse and worse, and towards the end, they couldn't perform as much. What does it say? It says that, it basically tells us that sleep is very important, rest is very important. So if you are tempted to play games until 3 a.m. and wake up at 7, just be a bit careful of it because you won't be as productive in class and you can't absorb as much. And of course, as you go to the workforce, the same thing applies. Let's close with this. There was a study, some of you might have seen this. It's a 75-year-old study. It's actually reaching 80 years now. And it's a Harvard study on what's the most important thing to be happy in human life. And how they did this research was over the 75 years, they went to Harvard College, they went to Boston, and they researched and studied people throughout the whole history from the day of their youth all the way till they die. And their subsequent generations, their wife, their kids, some of them are very poor, they became rich. Some of them are very rich, they became poor. Some of them, one of them became a president of the United States. So they studied all these people. And actually, before I continue, there's something interesting that I want to share because a lot of you are students. And there was a survey that was done for students. And they asked the students, once you enter the workforce, what's the one thing that you want to gun for? And 80% of them say they want to gun for money. They want to be rich. Another 50% say they want to be famous. But it turns out that as they study all these people throughout their lives, their descendants, what they found is that the most important factor of human happiness is not the money that you make or the fame that you have, but it's actually the quality of the relationships that you have. Good relationships make you happy, and that's it. So how is this connected? Well, for most of our waking lives, we will be working. We need to make our workforce happy. We need to be happy at work. We need to influence our team, our colleagues, to be happy at work. Because happiness is actually scientific. The happier you are, the healthier you are. They also did a study whereby they tried to predict who will live until the age of 80. And what they found at the age 50, the people who will live a healthy life at age 80 were not the people with cholesterol problems, with health problems. The people without those problems, rather, the people who will live a healthy, happy life at age 80 are people who have very good relationships with their wives, with their relatives, with their kids, with their family, with their friends. Most of us, during COVID-19, we had some difficult times with our friends, our relatives perhaps. Relationships are not as good during this time. Now that we are going back to normal, it's good to try to repair those lost relationships because I'm pretty sure that you and I, we may have those things that we could have done better in our relationships. And I hope that in this talk, you have learned something. It's so good to see you all, and have a good day. Thank you.